Jane knew that her hands were shaking as she sat at her desk, desperately trying to focus on the spreadsheet in front of her. The busy office around her was fading into the background as anxiety began to coil tightly in her stomach. Ever since that colleague of hers had begun to torment her, work had turned into a living nightmare. Welcome back, listeners. Thank you for joining me again today. This is Leading with Integrity, Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers working in tech-driven businesses and teams and who want to be more effective, more ethical, people-first leaders. Join me each week to learn the crucial strategies, mindsets, and practical steps that successful modern leaders follow to be engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who are able to get the best from their teams. We achieve all of this via weekly conversations with leaders, with leadership experts, with entrepreneurs and business owners, all of whom have already walked this path and have some amazing stories and insights to share, with an added sprinkling as well of the occasional solo episodes, such as this one, and every now and then we'll do some group chats as well with 2 or 3 guests at once. My name is David Hatch, and I will be your host. Leadership has always been a passion for me. After a career spent in a series of small businesses and startups during nearly 15 years in the aerospace and space sectors, I learned that the secret to successful management is in the ability to apply great leadership skills. And the secret to great leadership is all about your integrity, putting people first, and avoiding some of those traps that every horrible boss has ever fallen into. Over 3 years ago, I left that career. I started out on my own. I started my own business. And today, I help new managers, first-time leaders, be more effective, engaging, and successful as leaders while avoiding burnout, stress, disengaged people, and all those other horrible, pervasive problems that will always crop up around bad leaders. I care about this because everyone, myself included, has had that bad manager experience at least once in their career. And some of us have even made these mistakes ourselves. Bad leadership is everywhere, it seems, but it shouldn't be. And because making that transition from practitioner to manager, from doing the work to leading the work, is a difficult one. Change is always difficult, but this particular transition can be one of the most difficult people will face in their entire careers, but it's almost certainly going to be the most difficult one they have faced so far in their career. It's also the stage of your journey where you're going to be least likely to get access to leadership development from your employer. So that's what I'm all about, helping new managers be more effective via better leadership skills. I focus on tech-driven small businesses and startups of the kind that I've worked in for so long myself, and I'm on a mission to spread great leadership as far and wide as I can. One of the ways that I do that is with this podcast. So today we're going to be doing part 3 of our 4-part mini-series about the power of great leadership. As you may know, Leading with Integrity recently passed our milestone 50th episode, and so for all of this month, I've been dropping an extra episode a week in celebration and as a thank you to all the loyal listeners that are out there. In today's episode, I'm going to be telling you 4 small short stories that illustrate some key leadership lessons, which we'll talk about at the end.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Welcome again to part 3 of our mini-series on the power of great leadership. In this episode, it's just going to be me by myself again, and I'll be sharing 4 stories with you that followers have told me about their leaders. There's a lot to learn, I think, in how people experience your leadership. And so I thought it might be interesting to explore the topic from the perspective of the follower, the staff, the employee, and rather than the leader's perspective that we look at so often. These are real stories that have been shared with me over many years by colleagues or clients or friends or combination thereof. And I've chosen these particular experiences, these particular stories very specifically because they align with 4 important leadership mistakes that many managers fall into. Understanding the mistakes and the things not to do is at least as important as knowing the right things to do when we're trying to apply great leadership and achieve the true power that has to make a real difference in people's lives. So unlike a couple of episodes ago, I can promise you now there is no twist this time. Maybe that's a bad thing, I don't know. But none of these stories are about me. They're not all about the same person. Although, to be 100% honest with you, I certainly have experienced and witnessed all of them in my ghosts of workplaces past, as I'm sure you probably have too. So as before, to protect the identities of those involved, I won't be using anyone's real names, real companies, locations, and anything that otherwise might give away or be obviously identifiable will be changed. This time around, I've even gone a step further. I've used the internet to generate a whole bunch of random names for me to use instead. Let's hope we can keep track of them all. Okay, here we go. Here is our first one. Jane can feel her hands starting to shake. She's desperately trying to focus on the spreadsheet in front of her. The busy, bustling office around her starts to fade into the background as that anxiety becomes coiled tightly in her stomach. Ever since one of her colleagues has begun tormenting her, work has turned into a living nightmare. The bullying started subtly, with the occasional snide remark or veiled insult. But over time, it escalated into what she now feels is a relentless campaign of bullying and gaslighting that's left Jane feeling powerless and small. She never knew when the next attack would come or how it might manifest itself. Every encounter she has with this colleague, who Jane actually preferred to keep anonymous, sent a shiver down her spine. They almost seemed to take a twisted pleasure in undermining her self-worth and diminishing her skills at work. Jane has often sought solace and support by confiding in her manager, who we'll call Louise, hoping for some support, understanding, some action to deal with the situation. But unfortunately, Louise dismissed Jane's concerns, suggesting instead that she was probably overreacting or misinterpreting the situation, or it's just banter, get over it. Louise, despite her role as supervisor, as manager, seems blind to this ongoing torment. And when Jane finally musters the courage to speak up again, hoping for validation, Louise brushes it off as mere misunderstandings. Jane starts to feel like her pleas for help are falling on deaf ears, as if her pain and the suffering she's going through at work is inconsequential. Left feeling abandoned and alone, let down by her manager, Jane's confidence crumbles under the weight of this relentless bullying, and it has become relentless by this point. Her tormentor, on the other hand, only gets more confident. They seem to revel in this power they apparently have over Jane, using this power to manipulate and gaslight and undermine her real credibility at work. They would start to distort facts, twist conversations, spread malicious rumors, generally just create a toxic work environment that swallows Jane completely whole. Days turn into weeks, and the problem persists. It becomes more relentless, more insidious, more frequent, and Jane just finds herself completely isolated at work without any recourse or relief. The constant stress and the emotional strain that this has takes a severe toll on her mental health, leaving her feeling defeated and shattered. There comes a point, after months of this, determined to reclaim her dignity and her happiness at work, Jane decides she's not going to endure this torment any longer. She begins to document each incident, gathering evidence of the gaslighting, seeking guidance from people she knows outside the business who work in HR, for example. It was time to confront this darkness that had begun to envelop her at work. An investigation was finally launched by her company. Jane's claims were substantiated. Coincidentally, at around the same time, her manager, Louise, has moved on to a different department and a different role and has been replaced by a much more proactive leader who wholeheartedly supports the investigation and Jane's rights at work. That investigation finds a pattern of systematic bullying and manipulation that's been inflicted by one of her colleagues. The company, recognizing the severity of the situation, takes decisive action, addresses the toxic environment, and ensures the well-being of all of their employees. I'd like to say this happened better late than never, but as we can probably guess, much of the damage was already done, and the whole process really took far longer than it should, from the initial reporting to action being taken. Although scarred by the experience, Jane's resilience has shone through. With time, she grew into an advocate for victims of workplace bullying, sharing her story and raising awareness about the devastating effects of such behaviour. In our second example, we join a different character, who we're calling Samantha. So Samantha, again, works in a pretty busy office environment, all of which starts to seem distant as she buries herself in her work. She really enjoys what she does, she loves the detail of it, and she loves just getting really stuck into it. However, once again, there is a constant shadow looming over her shoulders, suffocating her with an overwhelming presence. This time it's not bullying, thankfully, but it is the weight of micromanagement. And that weight in her workplace had slowly chipped away at her enthusiasm and her job satisfaction. Her boss, who we're going to call Mr. Thompson, seemed incapable of trusting his employees to complete tasks independently, even the simplest of tasks. Every decision had to be run past him. Every action was monitored. Every email was proofread personally by him before it was allowed to be sent, and he has to be CC'd, copied in to every single one of them. Samantha feels at times like a puppet on a string. She doesn't have any autonomy. What she did have has been stripped away. The simplest tasks requiring his approval, stifling her creativity, hindering her efficiency. Mr. Thompson's preference for this micromanagement is manifested in daily check-ins, constant emails seeking progress updates, and unwarranted interventions. He hovers over Samantha's shoulder, offering unsolicited advice and criticism, leaving her and others feeling inadequate and disempowered. This suffocating atmosphere gradually erodes Samantha's confidence. She begins to doubt her own abilities and second-guess every move she makes, every business decision she makes. The joy that she once found in her work has been replaced by anxiety and self-doubt. She yearns for the freedom to take ownership of her own projects and make decisions based on her own expertise and knowledge. When she attempts to communicate these frustrations to Mr. Thompson, hoping for a change, what happens, do you think? He dismisses her concerns. He labels her resistant to guidance. He believes that his micromanagement is necessary for maintaining quality control and meeting deadlines, failing to grasp the detrimental impact that it was having on the well-being of his employees. And once again, days turn into weeks, weeks into months. Samantha's dissatisfaction grows. She feels trapped in a never-ending cycle of scrutiny and control. The lack of trust and respect from her boss drains her motivation and enthusiasm. She doesn't enjoy her job. She struggles to get out of bed in the morning and go to work. And she longs for a work environment that places value on her skills and offers the autonomy that she deserves. And so one fateful day, overwhelmed by the constant micromanagement, Samantha makes a decision. She drafts her resignation letter. She puts in her notice. She pours all of her frustrations onto that page, and it becomes a bittersweet moment, a catharsis, a release, a leap of faith toward finding a more fulfilling professional journey. And as Samantha hands in this resignation letter, gives her notice, she feels a mix of relief and sadness. She'd poured heart and soul into this work, into this job, but that, again, the word toxic is appropriate, but that micromanaging environment had taken its toll. She knew she deserved better than being suffocated by a supervisor who could not see beyond his own needs for control. Word of Samantha's departure spreads pretty quickly throughout this office, raising eyebrows and sparking conversations. Several colleagues who've experienced exactly the same from Mr. Thompson admired her courage, while others silently shared her frustrations, not wanting to risk speaking out. Perhaps more happily, the void left by her absence serves as a wake-up call, in part, for Mr. Thompson, but also for the company as a whole. Recognising the loss of a valuable employee and the need for change, the company undertakes let's call it a reflective process. They acknowledge the detrimental effects of micromanagement, both on employee morale and engagement with their work. Training programs were implemented to help empower managers with effective leadership and trust-building skills so that micromanagement no longer is the norm. Meanwhile, Samantha has embarked on a new journey, determined to find a workplace that would value her expertise, offer her that autonomy and respect. It wasn't easy, but with what she's been through so far, she refuses to settle for a toxic environment or one that would stifle her career growth. And she does find a new role, a better paid new role in a bigger company as well. In that new role, Samantha flourishes. She finds herself in an organization that fosters a culture of trust and staff empowerment. Her creativity blossoms, her innovation goes through the roof, and her contributions are celebrated by not just her own manager, but the senior managers above them and the business as a whole. The experience serves as a reminder of the importance of a healthy work environment where employees are given that freedom to excel and make meaningful contributions, but also the freedom to make mistakes and learn lessons. As Samantha looks back on her time in her previous job, she now understood that leaving was the right decision, whilst it might have felt a bit sad at the time. And even the negative experiences were still valuable because they taught her resilience and the importance of advocating for oneself. She becomes another vocal advocate, this time for the importance of work-life balance and cultivating these supportive work environments. And she hopes that that will help to spare others from enduring that suffocating grasp of micromanagement. Throughout her journey, Samantha discovers that her true worth was not defined by her former boss's demands for control, but by her ability to thrive in an environment that recognized and nurtured her talents. And in that realization, she found the professional fulfillment that she had been longing for. There endeth story number 2. And our third leading character in this episode is Daniel. Again, we join Daniel in an office environment. It's not quite as busy as the other two were, but it works on more longer term jobs. So that's perhaps a reason. Sat at his desk, he glances up and sees right in front of him a closed office door across the room. That closed door has become a familiar sight, an impenetrable barrier that separates the team leader from the rest of the employees. The isolation is palpable. It creates a sense of disconnection that permeates their entire work environment. Their team leader, we'll call him Adam, has a knack for shutting himself off from the team. Behind that closed door, decisions are made, strategies are formed, and information is withheld. It seems as though his office served as his fortress. It shields him from any meaningful collaboration or engagement with the very people he is supposed to be leading. It prevents him from having to have any difficult conversations or listen to anything other than his own echo chamber. For Daniel and his colleagues, though, that closed door symbolizes more than mere physical separation. It's a metaphorical wall that blocks communication and stifles teamwork. The lack of transparency and involvement eroded their sense of belonging and made them feel like mere cogs in a machine awaiting the master's instruction. They yearned for a leader who would actively engage with the team, who would foster an environment of open dialogue and shared goals. But instead, Adam remains distant, only emerging from his office for sporadic meetings or to issue directives and instructions without any explanation or context. The absence of meaningful interaction has consequences. Daniel and his colleagues struggle to align their efforts with the bigger picture because they don't know what the bigger picture is. They haven't been told. And they often feel like their work is disconnected from the team and the company's overall objectives. Their motivation wanes and a sense of apathy begins to seep in. Attempts to bridge the gap were met with resistance. Knocking on Adam's door, hoping for guidance or clarification, often resulted in a brusque dismissal or a promise of "we'll discuss it later" or "not now, I'm busy." Later rarely came. There was nothing other than the "now I'm busy," leaving Daniel and the team in a perpetual state of uncertainty. That lack of leadership presence has left a void that is filled only with speculation and rumours. The team began to feel like they were drifting aimlessly, lacking the guidance and support they desperately needed. Unsurprisingly, morale begins to plummet, and the once vibrant, collaborative atmosphere grows stagnant. Daniel knew something had to change. He decided to voice his concerns during a team meeting, bravely expressing the collective frustration over Adam's isolated leadership style. He highlighted the need for a leader who actively participated, who communicated openly, and listened to their team's ideas and concerns. And while those words resonate with his colleagues, Adam's response was lukewarm at best. He acknowledged their concerns but failed to take any meaningful action, and there was no follow-up. The closed door remained closed, a symbol of his unwillingness to adapt, to change, or to connect with the team. And so the frustration continues to grow, and resignation became a whispered conversation among the team members. They knew they deserved a leader who would champion their growth, foster their collaboration, and inspire them to reach new heights. It became very clear to all of them that staying in an environment of isolation, of indifference, would only hinder their own professional development, but also they could never succeed as a team without engaged leadership. One by one, team members began seeking new opportunities, some faster than others, eager to find workplaces where their voices would be heard and their contributions valued, and they could feel like they were being led. Daniel too made the difficult decision to move on, to find a leader who embodied the principles of collaboration and open communication. When that time came, when he found that leader, he hands in his notice, and as he leaves that office for the last time, he can't help but feel a mix of disappointment and relief. Again, those familiar emotions. Disappointment that Adam's closed-door leadership had hindered their team's potential, but relief in knowing that a brighter future awaited elsewhere. And when I asked Daniel to reflect on his experiences there, what he'd really taken from it was he became determined to be a leader himself who would break down those walls, who would open those doors rather than build them up or close them in people's faces. When he himself became a leader, he vowed to create an environment of trust where open communication and collaboration were the foundations of success. And throughout all of his journey, he would strive to be the leader he had always hoped for, an inspiring force that united and empowered his team to achieve the greatness that he knows people are capable of. So that story actually has a kind of nice ending, doesn't it? One more to go then. And for experience story, or whatever we'd like to call it, number 4, we're joined by Rachel. And we join Rachel's story on one of a series of particularly difficult days that she's had at work. She sat in the break room on her 10-minute mandatory coffee break, and all she can hear throughout the rest of the quite large office is the sound of celebratory applause as it echoes off the walls and the horrible suspended ceilings. The cause of all that applause and celebration is her department head, who we're going to call Jim for this story. And he's basking in yet another round of accolades for a successful project completed. But Rachel, of course, knows the truth, and she can't help but feel a pang of frustration because she knows that lurking beneath the surface of that celebration is effectively a lie. Jim has a knack for taking credit for the hard work and achievements of his team. He skillfully presents himself as the driving force behind their accomplishments, skillfully positioning himself as the indispensable leader, department head in the eyes of the CEO. Meanwhile, the efforts and contributions of the team members who work for him are conveniently brushed aside or attributed to his own genius, if they're even mentioned or acknowledged at all, which they rarely are. Rachel and her colleagues poured all of their expertise and skill into their work every day, only to watch all of those efforts eclipsed by their department head's relentless self-promotion. It leaves a bitter taste in their mouths, sowing the seeds of resentment and demoralization throughout the whole team. They yearned for recognition and acknowledgement, but it seemed that their contributions would forever be overshadowed by Jim's calculated maneuvers. The frustration grew with every passing project, their creativity stifled, their ambitions subdued, as Jim continued to exploit their work for his own personal gain in that horrible game of office politics. He revelled in that limelight. He secures ever more and greater rewards, pats on the back, promotions, bonuses, pay rises, while the team that he is supposed to be leading languishes in the shadows, feeling undervalued and underappreciated. Rachel reaches a point very soon in our story where she can't remain silent any longer. This has been going on for the entirety of her job at this company. So she summons the courage to raise her concerns to the CEO himself, hoping for justice, let's call it in inverted commas, but more importantly, a change in the dynamic. And so in a tense meeting, she presents evidence of Jim's pattern of taking credit for the team's achievements. To her utter dismay, the CEO dismisses her claims with a wave of the hand. He seems uninterested in the truth, instead choosing to perpetuate the narrative that Jim had carefully crafted, but also really all he cares about is the result. And at the end of the day, the result comes from the team that Jim is leading. The CEO even goes further and praises Jim's leadership skills, telling Rachel she should be grateful to be able to work for him and learn from his expertise, and attributing the department's success largely to Jim himself. It became pretty evident pretty quickly that the CEO was completely enamored by Jim's charm and charisma and blinded to the injustice being inflicted upon that team. Within weeks of that thoroughly unsatisfying conversation, Rachel's frustration reaches its boiling point. She has desperately pled for recognition and fairness, but her words fell on deaf ears. The CEO's stubborn refusal to address the problem has left her feeling defeated and powerless. Meanwhile, Jim continues. He takes credit for the work of his team. He offers no recognition for the people doing the actual work. And so it's a stalemate. There's a battle she can't win against a system that has prioritized personal reputation over integrity. Disheartened generally, Rachel continues to work with a heavy weight on her shoulders. That workplace has become a pretty horrible environment to work in, one where her contributions are undervalued and her aspirations ignored. One thing is for certain, though, they will no longer be getting her best efforts, because if those efforts are going unrecognized, what's the point? She even contemplates leaving and seeking a new opportunity, a better job, where her efforts might be recognized and rewarded. It's a frequent but passing thought. And as again weeks turn into months, that turn into years, that frustration lingers. Jim's department doesn't perform as well as it once had, but continues to meet all of its targets and all of its minimum deliverables, despite doing so under the false facade of Jim's success persona. And while the team members within it grow increasingly disenchanted and demotivated, Rachel herself is torn between her desire to make a difference versus the grim reality of the situation. She chooses to stay, though, at least in the medium term, hoping that change would eventually come. And so this story really ends on that impasse, that stalemate. The team members are caught in this web of injustice. They're struggling to reconcile their passion for their work and their overall belief in the company with the disillusionment they feel with having credit taken for their work and their recognition or progression. Not all of them are aware of the conversation that Rachel had with the CEO, because she is quite discreet and she doesn't want to make the problem worse. But the refusal to address that problem has perpetuated a cycle of discontent, frustration, disengagement, and diminishing productivity, leaving Rachel and her colleagues really ultimately in a state of limbo. And so this workplace has unfortunately remained a battleground of unfulfilled potential, where the talents of the team are buried beneath the adopted, the fake, the pretend reputation of their department head. Rachel and her colleagues continue to persevere to this day. Their spirits are dampened, but not extinguished, and they still hold out hope that one day their voices will be heard and their contributions will be recognised. And who knows, maybe we're too early in this story to see the outcome. Maybe they're right. I certainly hope for Rachel's sake that they are. That's where we leave our 4, let's call them suffering employees, although, as we know, some of them have moved on and addressed the situation. Some of them are still suffering through it. So let's talk about the 4 lessons that we can draw from those experiences. And at the heart of that is 4 errors that the managers, that the leaders had made. And those errors were allowing or mishandling bullying and harassment, micromanagement, isolating themselves from the team, and stealing credit. So what is there to be learned from these stories and experiences? The first lesson, I would hope, is very obvious to you already. Bullying and harassment are unacceptable in any workplace. And as a leader, the responsibility is to stamp out this kind of behaviour immediately. So it's an obvious warning sign if this kind of behaviour is being overlooked, tolerated, diminished, or even encouraged in some of the worst cases. But quite often, the problem is knowing it's going on in the first place. Many employees don't want to raise this issue with their manager for fear of being seen as the difficult one, the squeaky wheel, the troublemaker themselves, or just having it ignored or brushed off, or even worse, in some cases, the fear of reprisals. And there's also many forms of bullying or harassment that can actually be quite subtle, pervasive, and gradual over a long period of time. So it's very hard to sometimes notice it's happening even for the person who's experiencing it. So as I say, it's quite difficult to detect sometimes, which means the values, mindset, and culture piece from the leader are that much more crucial. Generally, if you have a problem of someone going against the culture and the values of an organization, then as a leader, it's your responsibility to act and do something about that. As hard as it may be to have that kind of conversation, but if one of your team is causing harm to the culture or to others in the team, then in my opinion, they've simply got to go. Depending on the severity, it's not going to be a one strike and you're out kind of thing. You might wish to have a conversation and try to get the behavior to change. But ultimately, if that behavior doesn't change, or if it is an incredibly severe and harmful impact that they're having, then you don't really have a choice. And when it comes to bullying and harassment, this is doubly, triply, 100 times more important. Send a clear message. This kind of thing isn't tolerated, and you will do wonders for the culture of your workplace. So that's the lesson from our first story. Now let's talk about micromanagement. There are few things worse at work when you're under a deadline or just trying to have a productive day and you have this feeling of someone looking over your shoulder all the time. It is awful for concentration, especially when your manager is literally standing over you, watching you work. But the reason why it's such a mistake for a leader to make goes a bit deeper than the surface issue of breaking people's concentration. Because if you are managing by directly supervising every single task in the way that we heard in this story, or critiquing every element of people's work, no matter how small or trivial, and even if you're only doing it some of the time, or for certain tasks or certain people and not others, then the message you're sending is still loud and clear to everyone in the team, not just the person or the task that you're micromanaging. That message you're sending, whether you mean to or not, is this: I don't trust you lot to do your jobs. Is that a message you want to send? I'm going to suggest very strongly, no, it's not. So there's a compound issue here, isn't there, of both the practical element of distracting people and that psychological, cultural and mindset issue of sending a really quite harmful signal to the team about how much or how little you trust them. So the lesson here is trust your hiring, trust your HR processes, trust that they will give you capable team members, and that your internal training, that your own leadership are going to give them the skills and the environment to be able to do their jobs, and then actually trust them to do their jobs. Even if you do think that someone is underperforming, having you stand over and watch their every move is not going to solve that problem. Taking this approach in a business setting is not the way to build rapport, trust, engagement, or even, frankly, a basic level of interest from your team members. This is not the way. At its worst, it can result in some really negative outcomes for all involved. So, pick an approach to leadership that will focus on feedback and collaboration and communication, and you will be best equipped to lead your team to success. And we saw what happened in Samantha's story, didn't we? She felt that lack of trust, that lack of respect, and what did she do? She left. She went and found herself a new job in a better working environment where she was trusted to do her job. So that's really the ultimate lesson of that story, isn't it? Especially when we live in a world now where replacing a lost staff member will cost up to or more than 300% of their salary. And the third lesson from our third story, trying to set yourself apart or show that you're different, better, above, outside of the team that you're leading is a difficult one. And we saw what happened in Daniel's story and how the negative impacts that resulted from that. So in this one, there is a tricky balance to strike as a leader between being able to set the direction and drive the performance on the one hand, whilst also be credible, trusted and respected on the other. Setting yourself too far apart from the team, failing to take an interest in the people that you are leading, and acting absent empathy or support, or otherwise allowing that ego to drive your workplace behavior, to create those artificial barriers, can get in the way of your ability to lead, to manage. So you've got to be able to demonstrate that you're in the muck too, that you've got your metaphorical sleeves rolled up, you're working alongside everyone else, and that you're all part of the same organization, working towards the same goal, supporting people when challenges arise, communicating well, not just swooping in to take the glory or issue the decrees from on high. It's fundamental. People are less likely to trust a leader who sees himself as above the team. And it's really as simple as that. Our final lesson about stealing credit. There's really two sides to this mistake, and it's about how the leader reacts to those opposite outcomes. On the one side, the big mistake is to try and use that fear of punishment or failure as a tool for motivation. So reacting negatively when things go wrong. We didn't really see that in this story. What this story really was about was the other side of it, which is equally damaging, and that is failing to recognize the contributions of others. So the guiding principle here for an effective leader is take responsibility, not credit. So what that means is when there's good work, when there's success, acknowledge that publicly, recognize the team or team members who produce it, and don't take any credit for yourself because it's not about you. When things go wrong, as the leader, you need to accept and take responsibility for it, but also you need to deal with it privately or one-to-one with your team and do so in a supportive way. Mistakes happen, so what you need to do there is work with people, understand what actually went wrong and why, and then together help produce a plan to correct it and avoid it happening again in the future. Focus on what can we learn from this. It's a tough life, isn't it, being responsible like that? It's difficult to always feel like you're the one taking the responsibility for the mistakes and things going wrong, and that you never get celebrated for the success. But ultimately, that's your responsibility as a leader. That's what you're taking on by assuming that role. And yes, the temptation is always going to be there to say, look what my team did, aren't I great? But do not make it about you. This is another key behavior where you can relatively easily build respect and rapport with the people you're leading, because they will trust you more. They will respect you more. They will work harder for you when they know that you're not going to take credit for their work, that you are going to make sure they don't get all of the flack and the blame when things go wrong, that you've got their backs. But if you get it wrong, you can just as easily lose all credibility in your entire organization and struggle to get any support from your team at all. And you just won't be able to get the work done at that point. Now, the example in Rachel's story, that department head was pretty lucky that he had a CEO there who was covering for him. But that won't always be the case if that's the approach you decide to take. So I encourage you not to. Remember, take responsibility, not credit. So there we have it. 4 stories that followers have told me about their leaders over the years. The 4 mistakes that lie at the heart of those stories, and the 4 lessons that we can learn from them about good leadership. If you'd like to learn more about how to recognize and apply great leadership, how to lead with integrity and build an engaged, effective team, then I have a short course which will get you started. Learn the tactics, the priorities, the behaviors that I have applied in my own leadership to help you be more effective as a manager. This course is maybe a few days if you do it back to back. Get it now for less than £80. That's $100 if you're in the States. And if that sounds interesting, please do pay a visit to www.leadernotaboss.co.uk. And that link is also in the episode description. Or if you're listening directly on the podcast's website, then there is a button there somewhere that will say sign up to leadership short course today or something like that. Whichever route you take, click on the link, click on the button, type in the address. You will arrive at a page where you can enter your details, and I will be in touch very shortly. I hope you'll join me again next week for another 2 episodes. For Podcast Wednesday next week, I'm going to be interviewing a speaking coach, John Henney, and we'll be talking about how to more effectively communicate, what you can do with your voice to get your message across, and why that is an important skill for any leader. Even if the only time you speak is in meetings, you still need to be able to do it effectively. So that's going to be an interesting and another different topic to discuss. And then on Friday next week, we have the final bonus episode, part 4 of this mini-series. And in that one, I will be summarizing everything we've learned so far and walking you through my top tips, my key steps for what you can do to be a better manager. That's all for today. Just a big thank you from me. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate your time and your support for Leading with Integrity. And I hope that you'll join me again next week. And until then, remember to be a leader, not a boss.